This is Play-by-Playcast,
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
the podcast about play-by-play guys, for play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodett. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel
Joel?
with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Finally okay for Matt Frazier. Once again, Madtown is Matt's town. For the third straight year, he is the fittest man on earth. 2 for Toomey. She is the fittest woman on earth.
All right, back at it for episode number 115 of Play-by-Playcast. Thanks as always for the subscribe, the stream, the download, if you have a second, the rating or review if you're listening to us on iTunes or on Stitcher. This is, of course, the podcast about play-by-play broadcasters for play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by a play-by-play broadcaster. It's a professional development podcast that dives into the tips, tricks, experience, process, preparation, and stories of some of the biggest and best play-by-play announcers in the business. My name is Joel Godet. As always, you can follow the pod on social media at PXPcast or myself at Joel Godet, JoelGodett. Shoot me an email, jgodett at bsu.edu. BSU for Ball State University.edu is the best way to get in touch with me. Good time of year. Talked about it last week with fall football training camp starting. Now we are into the thick of it. Fall football training camp actually is ending, finishes on Sunday. It's the last practice of training camp for the Ball State football Cardinals. Class starts on Monday, and then it's an official game week on Friday. We are 1 week away from official game week practices because Thursday night, August 30th, is the kickoff of the 2018 college football season, which means I really need to start working on a chart. I don't have one yet, but I'm sure that by August 30th I will. It is just wild how the season has jumped upon us so quickly. This has been the fastest moving fall football camp, I think, of my now 7 seasons at Ball State. It's remarkable. Like, it has gone by in a whirlwind, and that's always good, I feel like, because fall camp can drag on, and it gets to the point where you just want to play a game, and you can't because you're still in fall camp. But the fact that it moved along quickly this year was a nice welcome change. So football next up on the docket. The most recent thing that I broadcast, though, was the CrossFit Games. Now, we talked about that a couple of weeks ago when I was up in Madison, Wisconsin, doing the teens and masters divisions, masters 35-year-old up to 49-year-old divisions at the CrossFit Games. And I said we would have on in the coming weeks the voice of the CrossFit Games, like the main attraction, not just the teenage division and the masters division, not just the age groups, but like the main attraction games. The open division athletes, your Matt Frazier's, Katrin David's daughter, Sarah Sigmund's daughter, Annie Thoris' daughter, Brooke Wells, Tia Claire Toomey, Josh Bridges, BKG, all those guys, Patrick Velder, Brent Fikowski, like the names in CrossFit. The main attraction. We would have the guy who calls that stuff on the podcast to talk about what it's like to broadcast CrossFit. And we indeed have followed through on that. Sean Woodland is the voice of the CrossFit Games and has been with CrossFit for several years now after originally getting into broadcasting as a television sports anchor. He worked for more than a decade for WJXT in Jacksonville, Florida. And in doing so, covered the Jags, covered college football for the Big Three, covered Tim Tebow when he was in college, but also when he was in high school in Jacksonville, Florida. And then got out of television, and he'll take us on his journey a little bit. Worked at a PR agency and then found his way into CrossFit. And not only has he started working for CrossFit, but he's kind of like, in a lot of ways, the internet face of CrossFit. Roy McKernan is a guy that is very well associated with CrossFit, and Tommy Marquez, too. is one of their other on-air personalities. But Sean Woodland does a lot of their update shows and interviews, and obviously does the play-by-play for the games, and is just you see him a lot. So he's kind of one of those guys that has almost been branded as CrossFit on air, if that makes sense. Like, you see him and you know what you're watching, which in one sense is in a lot of senses is really cool. So awesome conversation here with Sean about broadcasting something that's a little bit different here this week, and how he tackles it, how he goes about it, and his career path as well. And that is where we start, his career path, how one becomes the voice of the CrossFit Games. Sean Woodland is our guest here on episode 115.
Wrong place, wrong time. No, actually, it was it's a kind of funny story. It was just right place, right time kind of thing. I went to the CrossFit Games. I've been doing CrossFit since 2007, the year the CrossFit Games started, and I didn't even know, that kind of that they had a business, where they were located, that they had a media arm, nothing. But as I got more into it, I started kind of following it as a sport, and I was living in Jacksonville, Florida at the time. Moved back home to California in 2010, and as a fan, went to the games in 2011. And that was when they had just signed with Reebok. They had a deal with ESPN for some post-production shows. I didn't know any of this at the time. So I went to the games as a fan. And I was sitting there with my old college roommate, with whom I connected again through CrossFit, which is a whole other story. But we're sitting there in the tennis stadium at the what was then, I think, the Home Depot Center, now the StubHub Center. And I'm looking out on the floor, and I see that they got people in polo shirts with ESPN microphones, and there's a whole TV production thing going on. And I'm thinking, I got to get involved in this. And no one told me this was going on, because at the time I was I'd been out of TV for about a year. I was doing advertising, so I kind of I thought I had left my permanent media life behind me, and just decided that I got to find out how to get involved in this, because I'd had a lot of media experience doing sports as a local sports anchor in markets like Kalispell, Montana, and Tallahassee, Florida, and Jacksonville. I've been doing that for about 12 years, and got home after I was there and just fired off a random email to media@crossfit.com, I think was the address at the time. Didn't hear anything, and that was August of 2011.
It's funny, that's how I got involved in CrossFit too. Yeah,
you just send off an email, and it tends to work. So in 2012, I went and I got my level 1 coaching certificate at the University of Nevada, Reno. They were holding a level 1 seminar, and the gym I was currently attending in Sacramento said, "Hey, if you want to go do this, we'll pay half, because we need a coach, and then you can go get your certificate and you can coach here, and then we'll give you a break on membership fees." I said, "Perfect. That sounds like a good idea." Went to the seminar, and Pat Sherwood, who until recently has been a member of the media team, he's still with the company, but he has moved on to a different assignment, a different role, was one of the instructors. So I had seen Pat on a lot of the videos, and I approached him during a break and asked him how he got involved, and kind of explain a little bit about myself and my background. And he told me to, forward me your stuff. Here's my email, and I'll make sure it gets in the right people's hands. And at the time, I kind of thought he was just blowing me off a little bit, which you could understand why. I'm sure he gets a lot of that stuff at the level 1s, but he didn't. And I emailed him, and he emailed me back, and I didn't hear anything immediately, but I think it was April of 2012, I got a call from Rory McKernan, who is one of the big media personalities that has been around for a while with CrossFit, and was kind of in charge of building their media team. Because at the time, they had a bunch of people who knew a lot about CrossFit, but nothing about television. I mean, it's remarkable that I think by sheer force of will, they were able to get their stuff on air and done. They had no TV knowledge whatsoever. And he called me, and at the time, this was when we had 17 regional competitions that allowed people to qualify for the games. That has since been pared down, but we used to have 17. And they were going to take a team of people to go broadcast the Central East Regional in Columbus, Ohio for ESPN3. And Rory had gotten my email that I had sent in August. He said I'd been on their radar for a little while. He had heard from Pat. He forwarded Rory my information as well. And he asked if I would like to come do play-by-play for the women's part of that competition. And I tried to think of a word faster than yes. So I said, absolutely, I would love to. And that's kind of how it started. I went to Columbus, Ohio that year, and we had an army of people on that media team. And they were just trying out anybody who had some sort of public speaking capability, a lot of their level 1 staff seminar, a lot of athletes, anybody. They were just throwing up there to see what worked. And I was the only guy on the team who had any sort of media background, so any sort of TV training, where I was used to having someone in my ear count me down while I was doing something else, who understood sports broadcasting at all. They really liked what I did there. They had me back in for the games. They wanted me to do the individuals for the games, and I still wasn't working for them full time. I was just freelancing, and I did it in 2012, and then they hired me full time in 2013, and it's I've been doing it ever since.
Were you, before that, were you kind of like at peace with the television business? I know you got into PR and advertising after you had worked in Jacksonville. Was it one of those things where it was like, you know what, it was great for a decade, but I've moved on, and then this presented itself the way that it unfolded? Or was it one of those things where in the back of your mind you still had that bug and this was the right opportunity that unfolded in the right way?
I think it was a little bit of both. I think to start, when I first got out of TV, and moved into PR and marketing, I had kind of resigned myself to the fact that that was a great time. I have fantastic memories that I wouldn't trade for anything. I loved it, but I need to move on now because the business is clearly changing. It doesn't look like there's going to be an opportunity for me to continue my career in a way that I'd want to. But I always thought that, if the right thing came along, I'd get back in. But I just didn't think it was out there. I freelanced a little bit for Comcast Sportsnet in the Bay Area in California. Did a couple things for them just to kind of keep my toe in it. But I had kind of just resigned myself to the fact that I was going to have a job just like everybody else out there, and I was going to go do my job and do the best I could, and then have a life outside of that. And that was that. It wasn't something I loved to do, but it was, as I was fortunate to be employed at the time, and that was that. But then the whole CrossFit thing came along, and I said, yeah, this is it. I got to get back in. This will get me back in. It worked out.
Where did calling games, calling action, calling live events kind of fall on your spectrum of things you wanted to do? And obviously it's probably, well, I don't know if it's what you're most known for now, because everybody just kind of sees you as like the media face of CrossFit too. But I don't know, where was it kind of on your ledger of interest, and I guess how did it turn into what your job is now?
When I first decided I wanted to do broadcasting, it was really high on my list. I went to San Francisco State and went through their broadcasting and electronic communication arts department. They had a great sportscasting class, and we broadcast all of our own games because we were Division II and had no TV deal. So it was all local cable access. So it was a great experience. You just got to get in there and do it. And I always loved doing the play-by-play and that kind of thing. But getting a job out of college in that industry is very tough. So I focused more on the sports anchor side of it because I enjoyed doing that too. And I thought there would be more opportunities for me to be employed doing that. But it was always something that I wanted to do, but I just didn't think I'd get back into it to do it. And again, it was just one of those things where, right place, right time. I was literally the only guy they had that had any sort of TV skill whatsoever. And they said, all right, you're it. And I loved it. It's one of my favorite things to do now.
So what's your title officially?
I don't have one. I think I am the managing editor of the update show. I think that's what they call me.
That sounds pretty narrow for what you do.
It is, and that's the thing. People say, "Oh, well, what's your title? What's your main responsibility?" And I that's one of the cool things about the position and about CrossFit Games Media is that we all do a bunch of different stuff. I write, I produce, I host update shows, I do interviews, I do play-by-play, I manage the on-air media team. There's all kinds of stuff that I have my hands on, and I love it. One thing that I really enjoy is when we do our post-production shows for now CBS Sports Network, just the writing and the construction of those shows. I work hand in hand with some other guys at CrossFit HQ, and I really enjoy that part of it. It has nothing to do with being on air, but it's just the writing and the creative process. So I'm lucky that I get to do that as well. But it is definitely, it's great because you get to touch a lot of stuff, and it's a lot of fun. It's not just you're the play-by-play guy and that's all you do.
Yeah, I vibe with you on that one based on, kind of what I do in my full-time job right now too.
Yeah.
Is you get to call games, which is awesome, but it's also the creative outlet to write, produce, all that kind of stuff, which is kind of neat in the well-roundedness of it.
It keeps you from getting stuck in a rut, which is fun.
Yeah, 100%. Oh gosh, 100%. Second broad question: if we go to the play-by-play aspect of it, how does one call the CrossFit Games?
That's a really good question. I think you have to understand that it's a unique challenge, and you've done it, so you get it. It's going to be unlike anything you've ever done, because when you do a basketball game, you know that they're either going to be 2 halves or 4 quarters, depending on what level you're calling. You know that depending on where the ball is shot from, it's going to be either 2 points or 3 points. You know that a free throw is worth 1. You know all the rules going in, and they never change. Whereas with us, the field of play changes, the time in which the event is going to be done changes, the scoring changes, the number of athletes on the floor changes. So it's always different. So not only do you have to worry about keeping people updated on the action, you have to explain, okay, this is how many repetitions are in one round of this event. This is how many points this event is worth. There's no permanent scoreboard that with just 2 teams. So whenever you turn on a basketball game, you know who's leading and you know how much time is left and you know what the deficit is. Whereas with us, because it's based on a leaderboard, we don't have that scoreboard on the screen at all times. You have to keep people updated. Okay, this guy's in the lead by this much, and if he is ahead of this guy, this is what that means. So there's a lot of context, and there's just a lot of explaining you have to do, but you can't let that get in the way of calling the action. Now, fortunately, we do have some events that are a little bit longer that afford you the opportunity to do more of that explanation stuff, and then we have some that are just outright sprints where you just don't have the opportunity to do that. But when you have a chance, you have to remind everybody, okay, this is what this means. And I'll give you an example. We had an event at the games on Sunday, and it was 5 rounds. You ran 300 meters, and then you completed 20 calories on the assault bike, and then you pulled a sled 44 feet. That weighed 185 pounds for the men. Well, how do you score that? So I had to explain to the people at home, there's a ticker that we have up top. We call it our scoring hat that tracks the athletes and who's in the lead. Okay, well, the run counts for 1, and then you get 20, so 1 each for the calories, and then the pull counts as 1. So there are 22 repetitions in every round. So you have to explain that because people will just look at these numbers ticking up and they have no idea about context. So that's the biggest challenge, is just really trying to keep things in context and explaining things that are going on. Because you can put someone in front of a basketball game who doesn't know a whole lot about basketball, and they can probably pick it up pretty quickly. They know the basics, the basic stuff. But with us, even people who watch our sport a long time and who are dedicated fans, they might not know how the floor is laid out and why they're moving the barbell every certain amount of reps, or who's in the lead and by how much. So it can get kind of confusing.
Yeah, I think that was one of the most frustrating things for me, even when I just watched back what I did last week, was the amount of times I watched something and I was like, gosh dang it, Joel, like what am I watching right now? Like the need to continuously reset. Even it's almost like time and score is what is the event. Like every 2 minutes is what they're doing.
Yeah. And even for people that know the events, like I said, I finally got a chance to, we were talking before we started, I got a chance to go back and watch some stuff that I didn't get to see on site, and I don't know the events that well. And for someone like me, I still need to be reminded, okay, what's next? So it's you really have to keep that in mind. That's the biggest challenge.
One of the jokes in CrossFit too is constantly varied, but it's also it's a true foundation of it.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know how true this is. You'd be able to tell me more. But like Chase Ingram, who I worked with at regionals, and who's been on the media team, broadcast team for a long time, joked with me when we were at regionals that you'll go to the games and sometimes they'll before the event put down in front of you, okay, here's the event, 3, 2, 1, go. What's it like to broadcast an event when even you as the announcer don't necessarily have a whole lot of lead time on what you're watching?
It's tough. I mean, it's I think we made the analogy because we had an event like that at the games this year where they didn't tell the athletes how many repetitions there were, how many movements. They said, you're going to work until we stop. Now, luckily beforehand, we knew the count going in. So they have stopped sending us out there unarmed. That has happened before. But we usually get enough information so we can do a decent job of letting people know what exactly is going on and what the event is. But there have been times in the past before they understood the need to share information with the broadcast team where you do get thrown out there and you get handed the event description a couple minutes beforehand, and you got to have to make sense of it.
How hard is it to track everything that's going on? Just in terms of, I mean, you know, for you it was a little bit different because you're, for the most part, doing 10 at a time. You go to masters and teams, all of a sudden you're doing 20 people at a time. Trying to keep track of everything that's happening and not catching yourself by surprise when somebody does something and it's like, I'm locked in on Matt Fraser, and all of a sudden in lane 10, you know, Jared Enderton just came out of nowhere and started doing this. And what's the difficulty, and do you kind of have a trick in terms of how you stay focused on everything so you don't get caught?
Luckily, we have the higher we go in the competition, meaning from open to regional. So we have open, and then we have regionals, and then we have a game. So the farther we advance into the competition, the better tools we have to kind of help us do that. We have a great scoring system that allows us to keep track of what's going on the floor. And then the main thing that we try to do too is focus on the main race. That gets easier as the competition goes on, because during the first couple events, you don't obviously have a clear leader. The leaderboard hasn't started to sort itself out. But as you move on later in the competition, you understand, okay, the big battle here is for who wants to get on the podium. So it's for those top 3 spots. So we really try to do a good job of focusing on that and not get enamored sometimes with someone who might be winning an event but has no chance whatsoever of getting onto the podium. So while that's an interesting story, we try to focus on what's the overall battle going on, and that helps you narrow down the field a little bit. Now, it does get hectic with, like when you said, when you have 40 athletes on the field, and we had one this year where they put all 40 men in the water with the same colored swim caps and no really identifying marks on them whatsoever.
I did not envy you.
We had no idea. We thought, like, we think that's Brent Fikowski. We're not 100% sure, and luckily it was, and so we didn't have to correct ourselves on that. But it can be hard when there are times like that. But for the most part, that's one place where I think that Dave Castro, who's the director of the CrossFit Games, and his team have gotten better with helping us identify people who are on the floor, whether it be more visible numbers on their uniforms, whether it be the tattoos that they put on them if they're in the water of a number. So it does get a little bit easier to identify them that way. But again, for us, it's all more about the bigger race, not just the one going on in the event. And when we have 20 people out there, usually the way we arrange the lanes, we do it like swimming. So we put our top overall leaders right in the middle of the floor. So it makes it really easy kind of focus on those guys.
Is it one of those things where it's almost less that you're broadcasting it is a sport, but it's less like you're broadcasting a sporting event and more like you're telling a story of these particular people, if that makes sense.
No, I think that absolutely.
You're using the sport as a vehicle to tell these stories as opposed to calling the event in front of you sometimes.
Definitely. And we try to keep that in mind too, because a lot of our viewers who, if we're on CBS, who are tuning in for the first time, have no idea who Matt Fraser is or why they should care about him. They don't know who Brent Fikowski is or what his story is. They don't know about Pat Vellner's past. They don't know about, Bjorn Carl Gudmundsson. So we do take opportunities when we can to make sure that we tell those athletes stories about where they train, what their history is a little bit, any, interesting tidbits about them that kind of give people a hook to latch onto. Because if you don't know these athletes and you're just tuning in for the first time, it's hard to have a rooting interest. And we try to give people that, and we do try to tell their stories. And the games kind of becomes that. It's your story through your journey through this test. You have 14 events, and how are these guys doing with all these unique challenges that we throw at them? And that's definitely a cool story to tell, because, you have a guy like Matt Fraser who I think in 14 events never finished lower than 11th. That's incredible. I mean, that's well-rounded fitness right there. And that's the story you try to tell is why is it such a good test? Well, it's because it's testing all aspects of fitness, and whoever's best in all the events is going to be the fittest on earth. It's like if you were going to go find the fittest or the smartest kid in school, you wouldn't just take the kid who got the best score on the math test. You would look at math and English and science and history, and you would do all that. You test them in all those different subjects, and you make them write essays and do multiple choice, give them as many tests as you could, and then you would figure out their GPA, and then you would find your smartest kid. And that's essentially what we're doing with the games. And we do try to keep that narrative in mind as we're moving through the test.
Yeah, let me ask about prep on that note too, because and I guess it varies based on the audience you're broadcasting to. If you're just online or if you're doing something that is airing on CBS Sports Network or on Network CBS. But how you prepare, and then I guess how you use information on somebody like Matt Fraser, who, if you're a CrossFit fan, everyone knows who Matt Fraser is, and I have to imagine there are different kinds of questions you would ask him and different kinds of information you would try to glean from him versus somebody like Laura Horvath, who's a rookie who nobody had heard of, where, I mean, you would want to know from her, hey, how'd you get involved in CrossFit? How did it, all this kind of stuff. You're not going to ask Matt Fraser those types of things every year. How do you prep different athletes differently? And then how do you then utilize that differently based on the platform on which you're broadcasting?
So I'll use the example you gave. So with Laura Horvath, because she was a rookie, and for people who don't know, she was a female rookie out of Hungary, first Hungarian woman to ever qualify for the CrossFit Games. I got the privilege of watching her a couple times at the Europe Regional. And I was like, this kid's going to be good. She was, I think I saw her when she was 17 or 18, and she was hanging with the really talented athletes, but people don't know that. So you take Laura Horvath versus Matt Fraser, who everyone knows. So for Laura Horvath, it's more about more personal information about her. Okay, where did she come from? How did she get started in this? What is her athletic background? Who's her coach? What kind of things does she excel at? What has she done in past competitions at the regional level when she didn't quite make it? But what impresses people about her? So it's more personal information. Some things that you can tell people about how she has a climbing background, and that's why she's really good at rope climbs or whatever it may be, and that's how she got into CrossFit. So you sort of tell her personal story. Whereas with Matt Fraser, his story is how dominant and how good he's been. Everyone knows, at least in CrossFit, how he got into the training. He was a former Olympic weightlifter and decided to train for the Olympics. He ended up getting hurt, had to quit, walked into a CrossFit gym and picked up some bumper plates and started just Olympic lifting again. And someone said, hey, you might actually be pretty good at this. But and while that's a cool story to tell people because of the Olympic background, Matt's story, because of his competitive history, is more about how dominant he's been. So with a guy like Matt Fraser, who's been around for now 5 years, I try to focus on his accomplishments in competition. How many times he's been the overall leader in how many events, how many competitions he's won, how many event records he's set, how big his lead has been at certain points. Because the thing that people who've never seen the sport before need to understand about him is he's dominant. And then they say, okay, well, what does that mean? And so I try to use information that I get on Matt to put that in perspective. So he's, for example, had the CrossFit Games mathematically wrapped up the last 3 years before the final event even started. And each year his margin of victory has gotten bigger. Now this year he had more points on the table, but his margin of victory this year was bigger than it was last year. So it's stuff like that you do to give people context in order for them to understand, wow, this guy's really good.
Well, will you just assume at some point too that you have to have a certain level, like if you're watching on Network CBS, you're not going to tell Matt Fraser's story every single time. You're not going to revisit it every year. There's just kind of an assumed, you know what, I know this is on network TV, and I know you might not have seen it before, but listen, you just kind of have to infer by what we're saying that this guy's pretty good and kind of catch up to speed quickly as opposed to doing the whole shebang and kind of being repetitive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no question about that. And you can drop those little nuggets in there all the time just to I try to give people just some sort of idea. Even if it's just one thing, some sort of idea about how dominant this guy's been. So if we can just say, he's been the overall leader at the CrossFit Games in 40 of the 55 events in which he's participated. So people can understand that, and that's all you need. But you're right. You don't have time to go through the whole thing every single time we have Matt Fraser on, or that's all we would talk about.
How about when you broadcast heats of an event? And I know it was different for you at the games this year because I think you only did heats 3 and 4 of each event.
Right.
But if you go to regionals and you're doing heats 1, 2, 3, 4, if you're doing masters and teens and you're literally doing the same event 6 times,
right.
How do you approach keeping it fresh? Because literally, we went to the games and 6 times I would look at Jeremy and go, Jeremy, this is the jump finish. It involves this.
Right. Yep.
And like the questions that I'm asking, I would think of something in an event and say like, I could ask that here, but you know what? I'm going to stick it in my back pocket, and in 2 rounds through, I'll ask him because maybe it'll be good conversation then. How do you keep things fresh when you're doing the same thing multiple times?
Well, I think you said it. You put the good stuff in your back pocket. So some of those early heats, and the way that CrossFit works is so that we save the best athletes for last. So the best athletes in the top 10. So if you have 40 athletes in the field and you have you have heats of 10, the top 10 will go in the final heat. So when you do the first couple heats, you're dealing with athletes who, as far as the overall battle is concerned, is either making it onto the CrossFit Games podium or qualifying for the CrossFit Games. They are out of the running. And that's where I think you focus on, we try to focus on cool stories of athletes who maybe they've been to regionals 8 times and they've never been able to make it, or maybe this is their first appearance and they're a young athlete. How do they handle the test? You focus more on just trying to give people sort of a rooting interest in someone who really has no chance of having an impact on the competition. So that's what we try to focus on early on. It's about like cool stories, like Steph Chung, for example, one of the female athletes who was at the CrossFit Games, has such a great story with how she graduated med school in the United States, and then she moved to the Middle East, and she was helping teach I think it was like just some genius level course, like biological genetics or something that she should be building brains in her part-time. But it's a great story. So we wanted to tell that during the event, because the heat that she was in which she was competing had no bearing on the competition whatsoever. So it's about finding those cool personal stories and giving people a reason to stick with the event during that heat, so they can watch this girl who's got a great backstory try and finish. And then that's the other thing too. There's honor for these athletes in just getting through it, and you try to make it about that as well. But when then you start breaking down the event, like you said, this is the same thing we just did, and the keys are exactly the same. I think when you get later on, you try to relate it to stuff that you've seen in the past. So you saw these athletes who are all incredibly fit in the first heat not handle it as well as the athletes who are handling it right now in the later heats. So why is that?
Yeah.
What's the difference? What are these athletes doing that the other athletes were not doing? And then the competition also becomes more paramount as well.
Well, and
that helps.
Similar to the Olympics too, I would imagine, in terms of how that works heat wise.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
How do you broadcast 42,000 meters on a stationary rower?
Oh man! So yeah, for people who don't know, one of the events at the CrossFit Games this year, and it was a great test, but it was a marathon row. So all 80 athletes at the same time on the floor of the Alliant Energy Center Coliseum, all sitting on rowers for 3 hours. That's all the event was. And our plan was
the replay of the pass was great, by the way.
Yeah, I mean I think at that point we were all punchy and we were just going, let's show it. Why not? Who cares? But it was one of those things where we found out about the event and we all looked at each other, we're not going to do this whole thing, are we? And of course we didn't. The plan was just to do just to pop in every now and then and just do updates for people, because they could watch online, and we had a scoreboard that people could watch that basically showed where the boats were, or whether if they were actually in water, who was leading, how many meters they'd completed. So there it was a lot about, again, just storytelling, building up the athletes, trying to kind of set the stage for later in the competition, because by then we had 3 events, and so the leaderboard was starting to take shape a little bit. So it was about focusing on who are the great stories in this. We tried to focus on things like they each had a basket full of stuff that they could bring out, and Mike Arsenault, who was our sideline reporter, did a great job of kind of, without physically digging through them, but being able to look and see what people had brought. We got guests on one guy who actually invented the concept to rower, and he talked a little bit about how that whole idea came about. So you really have to just tell stories that are somewhat adjacent to the event that you're watching, and try to keep it interesting. And thank goodness we weren't on for all 3 hours. I think we could have done it with some production and some better planning. But I actually had a lot of fun doing that event, because it was such a challenge. Because there is nothing going on in front of you. There's just people going back and forth. But there is a race, so you are able to see who's winning, and then you can talk about strategy. And we had some great stories. One of the athletes, this guy by the name of Sean Sweeney, was sitting next to this kid from Australia by the name of Zeke Grove, and every 500 meters, Sweeney would tell Zeke Grove a dad joke. And that's how he kept himself entertained. We had another athlete, her husband was in the stands right in front of him, and he had a Disney movie on his computer that he kept turning around so she could watch. And so that little stuff starts to happen, and then you get stories and things you can talk about. And then there were athletes making deals between each other because they were, hey, are you going to come get me? No, I'm staying here. I'm not rowing any harder. So they're trying to, broker deals as far as like, you can finish there and I'm not going to come get you. But this guy, if he comes gets me, then I'm going to come get you. So we had these alliances being formed on the floor. So it was actually a pretty interesting event. And I was shocked at how many people sat in that Coliseum and actually watched that event. I thought that place would be empty. And it was about 3/4 full.
Yeah, it was wild just sitting there.
Yeah.
I got a kick out of it. I was just sitting there. I don't know. I guess I'm not surprised that you said that you thought you could do it for a full 3 hours, just because I feel like the challenge there as broadcasters, like, we like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
How would you have tackled a full 3 hours as opposed to the cut-ins that you guys did?
There would have been a lot of the desk hits, so we would have had a lot of studio hits with highlights from earlier in the day to kind of break things up.
That's fair.
There would have been a lot of interviews that we would have had to set up, and we had some of those. I don't know if they would have carried us through 3 hours. There would have been a lot of just going down to Mike Arsenault down on the floor and getting his observations, and he did a great job of bringing us those. And luckily, the two analysts who were working with me, Tanya Wagner, who won the CrossFit Games in 2009, and then Bill Grundler, who's been a competitor for a long time now, a master's athlete, they are well-versed enough in everything in order to sit there and talk about what they're seeing and why one technique is better than the other and what strategy is and what kind of effect this is having on your body and things that you need to keep in mind. And at that point, then it just becomes just sitting down with two of your friends and you're at a sports bar and you're just talking about a game like you would anywhere else. And hopefully the things you are saying are interesting enough that people keep watching.
All right, we're going to get you back to Sean Woodland here in just a second. But before we do that, I want to tell you about Audible.com. Free audiobooks. Here's the deal. If you go to audibletrial.com/PXPcast right now and sign up for a free 30-day trial of Audible, you're going to get a free 30-day trial of Audible and one free audiobook for you to keep on us. Here's the deal. I know there's more of you out there that can go do this because I get the numbers. So take a second and go to audibletrial.com/PXPcast and sign up for your free 30-day trial of Audible. Listen to audiobooks in the car, on the treadmill, at home, at work, wherever you want. I'm trying to think of other places, but I'm out of them. Free 30 days of Audible and a free audiobook for you to keep. And when it comes down to the books you have a selection of, listen, you've got them all. President is Missing, narrated by Dennis Quaid. That's the new James Patterson book, co-wrote with Bill Clinton, narrated by The Rookie. Like, can you get better than that? You've also got Water for Elephants. You've got The Help, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. That's narrated by Jim Dale. I don't know who that is, but I'm sure he's very good. If you're a political person, Omarosa's new book, that's on there, and it's narrated by Omarosa. audibletrial.com/PXPcast. Do it. It's free for 30 days. Now back to the pod. Let's talk about, you mentioned the Coliseum being as full as it was for the row. On Sunday, it was absolutely full. And the atmosphere is just electric. If you're listening to this and you've never experienced the Sunday of the CrossFit Games in that place, like, do yourself a favor and get there next year. But what's it like to be in that environment and broadcast something that we all talk about that week, that matters so much to so many people, and to feel that vibe? What's it like to have that kind of shock through your body as you're doing it?
It's awesome. I mean, I'll be honest, I was skeptical that we were going to be able to have that type of atmosphere there because I was such a big fan of the atmosphere in the tennis stadium in Carson, California, in the prior venue at the StubHub Center. There were some great moments there, and that was a different beast in and of itself because you were outside, you were under the lights. So it was a different thing, but the vibe there was so cool. I didn't know how that was going to translate to indoors now, in Madison, Wisconsin, in a more traditional setting. But our signage crew, our event team do such a great job of setting that place up and making it really conducive for spectators to have a great time. And people are into it, man. I go back to the final event last year for the women when it was Tia Toomey and Cara Saunders, then Cara Webb. fighting for the title of fittest on earth. It came down to the final event, and there was not a single person in his or her seat, and the sound had feeling. It was so loud, and to be part of that, and we're out in the open. We're not in a booth. We're right there with everybody. So you can hear that through your headset and you can feel it. And it gets you so fired up that you have to be careful not to go full fan mode and just go nuts. You have to understand that, okay, wait, I'm here to do a job and call this event. I have to remain somewhat professional, but it is very easy to get caught up in that. And
how do you stay calm?
Well, yeah, I mean, luckily the headphones do block out a lot of it. But it's I try not to. Obviously, I get caught up in it too, and when there's big events in the game, you up your energy a little bit, and I try to do that as well. But it's hard just to not sit there and watch, and understand that you look. I got to tell people still what's going on here, and what this means, and who's scoring what points, and what that means to the competition. And it's hard though, because that atmosphere is really, really cool. It's something special. And like I said, I was skeptical that it was going to work out like that, but it's great. I love it. I love the arena. There's nothing like it there.
I want to touch on big calls with you too. And in that environment, you get a lot of them. And I know you've talked in the past about having an idea of kind of what you want to say when you know somebody's going to win. And say that you're not flying blind into something. And that's actually a topic we talk about on this podcast a lot. And some guys have gone one way and some guys have gone a different way, and I've done a little bit of both. I know personally in my career. I know at the games last week when we're doing the teens, and Haley Adams literally put forward the largest margin victory in any division ever, I was like, I kind of want to do this one well. So I actually wrote down in front of me exactly what I wanted to say as the event started. I was like, I don't want to stutter over this. Let's have an idea here. And then hilariously enough, I looked down to read it and I read it wrong. But so I don't really know where I lie on how to handle it. But what's been your approach to having an idea so that you're kind of in the arena you want to be in? You're in the ballpark you want to be in with what you want to say when something big happens.
My Saturday night tradition is usually I go back to the hotel and I look at the leaderboard and I figure out, okay, who has a realistic shot of winning this thing? And luckily the past couple of years, it's been, for the men, it's been no doubt, it's been Matt Fraser. So I've only had to think of something for him. But for the women, it's a different story. For the women the past couple of years, there have been 3 or 4 sometimes people who have a legitimate shot of winning on Sunday. And I sit down and I just open a Word document and I start kind of just hammering out ideas. I'm like, that's can't be. I'll get rid of that. And this past time was, I think, the first time I've actually gotten to use a call that I came up with for the women, because the way it's ended the past couple of years, we didn't know who was going to win. There wasn't that big moment of, okay, she's across the finish line. That does it. She's clinched. But I'm always prepared for that in case it does happen and I get to use it. It's only worked out that way a couple of times where I've had a call in mind and then the timing works out and it's like, perfect. Okay. This is exactly what I want to say. But I have found that I'm better as I get older. I need to write things down. And I'm all in favor of that. But I think too, you got to make sure that you're not you don't get locked into that, because you will know if you have the opportunity to use it. If you're forcing it in there, it's not going to work. You have to have the opportunity and the call need to meet up in order for it to work. And you might have to abandon it. And I had to last year. In fact, if you go back and watch the last event from last year, I thought I was going to have that moment. And Tia Toomey's coming across and I start the call that I had for her. I go, this is going to be perfect. And then she doesn't make it and she stops. So I have to stop mid-call. And I'm like, I can't go with that anymore. So that's out the window. And now we got to call the race here because Cara Webb is catching up with her. But I think it's good to have a plan, but understand that plan might change. And if you think that you're forcing it in there, don't, because it's going to sound contrived.
What did you think going back of your call last year when you have to kind of throw out your idea of where you wanted to go, and then you get this really good down to the wire finish between Toomey and Saunders? And I don't know, how'd you feel that one went in hindsight?
I think I loved it. I mean, I would have much rather had the way it went than the way I was going to call it, because it was so much more exciting. And there were genuine reactions. I mean, Tanya, who was calling the event with me, she was screaming into her mic, "Oh no, what's going on?" And I was trying to just make sense of it all and just get caught up in the moment as well. And I always think the genuine reaction is better. And that was our genuine reactions to what's going on, I think translated really well. Would I like to have had that call that I had written for Tia Toomey go off perfectly? Yeah, because it would have been a cool moment had it worked out, but it didn't. And the alternative was just as good. To be able to be part of a moment like that and, show some genuine excitement and get caught up in it with the fans as well was just as enjoyable.
So I have one more broadcast question for you, and then one more question that semi-broadcast related.
All right.
The first one is about voice, because you've got, obviously, a really good set of pipes on you. Has it always been that way, or was that something that developed as you worked in television early in your career?
I think it kind of developed. The very first time I thought that I might actually be good at this, it goes all the way back to high school. And I used to get teased about my voice when I was in junior high and stuff, because I just had a deeper voice than everybody else. But I never really thought that it was good for broadcasting or anything like that. But in high school was the first time I ever had an idea that, you know what, maybe I could do something. I don't know. I was the captain or co-captain of our JV football team, and I was a pretty quiet kid in high school. I wasn't too outgoing or anything like that. And I remember we had our homecoming rally or something. So it was my responsibility. I had to announce the team in front of the whole, I had to call the guys out, in front of the whole school. And I remember my coach, he looked at me like, you're not going to be able to do this, but I know this is your responsibility. And I did it. And he came up to me after. He's like, man, you really did a good job. That was, you should consider doing something like this. And that was the very first time anybody had ever said to me that, maybe my voice would be, valuable in a broadcast setting. But I don't know. I think it's just, I was just lucky genetically with that. And I think you learn how to use it as you go on, as you advance in your career. And I think that I've just found the right outlet for it.
Well, your diction is like phenomenal too, by the way. So it's
thank you.
I like voiceover wise, I feel like it's just like, yep.
It's funny about that because I've struggled a lot, especially early when I first started, of speaking too quickly. And I've had to really, especially when I'm on air, really make a conscious effort of trying to slow down. And that's hard to do, especially when you get really fired up and you get excited about something. So that's something I struggle with. And I really have to make a conscious effort to make sure that I am speaking clearly and that I'm trying to slow down and I don't trip over my words, because it's easy to do. And I think a lot of people probably have that problem too. We all have our crosses to bear.
Is there a way that you do that? Or is that just like,
I tell people when I give advice to people who are kind of having a similar problem, I say, if you just focus on pronouncing every word clearly, that will force you to slow down. And if you understand you have more time than you think, because a lot of times I think, especially in broadcasting, we think that we don't have enough time, especially when you first start.
Yeah.
I got to get all this out now.
Oh, yeah.
You have more time than you think. 15 seconds is a long time when you think about it in order to speak. But when you first start and you hear that I have 15 seconds, it's like, well, okay, I better blurt all this out. But I just tell people, understand you have more time than you think, and just try to focus on just pronouncing every word clearly. And that'll help you. Makes it sound more natural.
Last question I have for you is sort of broadcast related, but more CrossFit related. And I joked on the air. There was one point where I introduced us, and I said, I was like, regionals athlete Jeremy Austin, scaled athlete Joel Gadet, glad to have you with us. Is there based on it's one of the only sports that you can broadcast where literally all of the announcers could partake in the event that we're calling if we actually put in the effort. If we actually legitimately trained for this, we all participate in the sport, we're just not good enough to get there.
Right.
Joe Buck is not training to play baseball in his backyard. So is there a pressure to be good at CrossFit based on the role that you have? Because people, I don't know, if people see you in a certain light, or it's like if I go drop into a box somewhere and I want to do a workout, I have to look like I know what I'm doing. I can't do something wrong, or I can't have weird form, or I can't get capped at this random box's wad of the day. How serious do you have to take your workout program above and beyond what a normal person would do just because of the role that you have?
I don't think it's about ability per se. I think it's about just being involved in it and being someone who's able to relate to what is going on the competition floor in some way, shape, or form. There's no way on God's green earth I'm ever going to do Fran in sub 3 minutes probably, but I know what that workout feels like. So I think I can speak about it from a place that other people who don't do CrossFit can't. Our community is all about authenticity. I learned that really early on. People who watch the CrossFit Games, who are big fans of it, they want to know that you are one of them. And as long as you're involved in it, as long as you are able to go into a gym every now and then and work out, and you give it your best effort, and you might not be the best athlete, I think that that's all they care about. Now, me personally, I tend to be a little more competitive, and I try to maybe push myself a little more than I need to, and I probably have some unrealistic expectations because I have the weird personality quirk where, and I tell people this all the time, and it's a huge problem. If you lined me up against Matt Fraser for an event, there's a small part of my brain that would be like, all right, this is how you're going to beat him. Now, that is ludicrous on every level ever. That's never, ever going to happen. But there is a small part of my brain that will think that. So I do like to be able to be somewhat good at it. So people know that I'm not only talking the talk, but I am trying to walk the walk. Now, I can't walk on my hands. I'm terrible at certain things. I don't have great numbers like some of these other guys, but I think as long as people know that I'm in there putting in the work and doing the workouts and I'm living the lifestyle, that adds credibility and that adds authenticity that I think in other communities isn't as important as it is to our folks, because our guys and women and everybody that watches the sport will sniff out a phony really fast. I mean, I learned that really quickly.
Yeah, my 1-rep maxes are what Matt warms up with. So
yeah, and same here. I mean, Bill is 50, my broadcast partner. I'm going to be 45, but Bill is 10 times fitter than I will ever be, and he will tune up people half his age that I work with. And it's just like, that's what it is, whatever. But we're all going to go in and work hard and have a good time, and that's all anybody really cares about.
Sean, if people want to find you or follow you or watch anything that you do, how do they track you down on the interwebs?
I'm on Instagram at @Woodland53. Same thing on Twitter, and then get a hold of me on Facebook. I'm on there, Sean Woodland.
All right, that is Sean Woodland joining us here on PXPcast. Thanks for his time as always, and a little bit of a different conversation that we had with him this week, and it's cool to pick out a sport that is a little bit different and kind of dive into how someone does something that we don't get a chance to watch on a regular basis. You know, how do you call football? How do you call basketball? There's a lot of football and basketball on TV. CrossFit is something that is a little bit more of a specialized thing, and in a lot of ways takes a certain skill set to be able to call. And now having done it, like, it is different. It is much different than calling anything else. It's much more like we talked about, broadcasting stories and human interest using sports as the vehicle. And like we said, too, I think in a lot of ways is very like the Olympics because of that. Like, it's more about, in some respects, more about who these people are and the feats they are accomplishing, and that story is told through what you're watching on your screen. It's told through the fact that they're climbing this pegboard or doing these muscle-ups or snatching this amount of weight, that you get to learn who these folks are and what they've gone through and how they've trained and how they're able to pull off what you're looking at. We also did talk there toward the very end about kind of laying out a final call, so to speak. And I said that I had mapped out what I wanted to say with Haley Adams. And to give you the backstory on that, Haley Adams was a 17-year-old girl in the 16 to 17-year-old division this past year. And of the 11 events that they had at the games, she won 9 of them. And her margin of victory, off the top of my head, was 224 points over Kayla Stefano, who was the 2-time defending champion in the division. And the 224 points went down as the largest margin of victory in any division in CrossFit Games history. So better than any, open competitor, men's, women's, team, teen, masters, any age group. Largest margin of victory ever. So going into the final, I was like, this isn't the main attraction at the games. This isn't on CBS Network television. It's not on CBS Sports Network, but it's still a historic moment, and I wanted to do it right. And I thought about it on my way to the arena that morning. Like, what am I going to say when Haley Adams wins? Because it was almost like a foregone conclusion that she was going to win. And right before the event started, I mean, like literally like a minute before the event started, I grabbed a sheet of paper and I scribbled down. Because remember, she won 9 of 11 events. And she lost the last one. She came in second. So she had won 9 of the first 10. So my thought process was, right before the event began, I scribbled down, Haley Adams was nearly perfect. No, I scribbled down, she was nearly perfect. Haley Adams isn't just the fittest on earth. Or Haley Adams isn't just the fittest teen on earth. Haley Adams is the fittest in history. So I wrote down, she was nearly perfect. Haley Adams isn't just the fittest teen on earth. She's the fittest in history. That's what I wrote down. And here is a lesson in scripting, how it can go well and how it cannot go well sometimes. Because what came out worked. It did work, and I'm okay with the call in hindsight. But it wasn't what I wrote. And I talked about it with Sean right there. I just said, like, I read it wrong. Because I wound up reading, she was nearly perfect, because I was going off the picture, so I didn't use her name right away. Because we were showing a 2-shot when she crossed the finish line. We had a 2-shot of her and the defending champ she knocked off. So I said, there was a shot of Kayla Stefano was her name. I said, Kayla Stefano pushed her the whole way. Haley Adams was nearly perfect. And then I looked down, and I read it wrong. And I said, Haley Adams isn't just the fittest on earth. She's the fittest teen in history. Accurate. Not exactly how I wanted it to come out. Because fittest teen in history, true, but also the fittest in history. Like, it was the largest margin of victory in any division. So it didn't go quite according to plan, but it still worked. And it's still, I think, had I not written it out along the lines of what I wanted to say. And I think it's good that I wrote it out. Because what's funny is that when I go and listen back to all the other divisions I did that day, and I also did 16-17 boys, 35-39 men and women, 40-44 men and women, and 45-49 men and women. In CrossFit, when you win, you're called the fittest on earth. You're not just the CrossFit Games champion. You're not just the winner. You're not just the champion. You are the fittest on earth in your division. Or if you're Matt Fraser or Tia Claire Toomey, you're just the fittest on earth. The only final call I had that had the words fittest on earth in it was the one I wrote out. And I know fittest on earth is the vernacular, but the only time I actually used it was the time I wrote it down for myself. So I thought that was interesting. I had some other good calls of championship wins. But the only time I said fittest on earth was the one time where I wrote down, say fittest on earth. And that's the one time I read it wrong, and it didn't come out quite the way I wanted it to. So there's a give and a take in terms of kind of how the plan can go when it comes to writing out what you want to say coming down the home stretch or what you want to say for a final call. So I just wanted to give you guys a postscript on that. But we are out of time for this week. So that will do it for us on this edition of PXPcast. Take a 7-day break. We are back next week, and we will go back to football mode. Do we ever have some awesome guests lined up over the next couple of weeks? Brad Sham is the voice of the Dallas Cowboys. He will be with us next Friday. Spiro Ditas, I've teased like to no end because he and I have gone back and forth a couple of times to try to set up a time, and a lot of it's on me. We just haven't been able to make it work. But I believe we're going to actually get Spiro on here in the next coming weeks. Dave O'Brien is the television voice of the Boston Red Sox. He is coming up, and a whole bunch of other names that I've got in the hopper for us coming down the next few weeks as well. So it's going to be a really interesting September and I think even beginning of October here for PXPcast. So keep it locked. If you're not a subscriber already, click subscribe before you depart, and we'll talk to you right back here. Same bad time, same bad channel. It's Play-by-Playcast, and we're out.